never thought I'd be writing one of those AITA posts, but here we are. To give you context, I basically grew up inside my parents' family business. While other kids were out riding bikes or hanging out after school, I was stocking shelves, helping with inventory, and learning how to balance the books before I even turned 16. It wasn't glamorous, but I believed in the dream, that one day my hard work would mean I'd inherit something stable, something I helped build with my own hands. By the time I graduated college, I already had nearly a decade of experience under my belt. I passed on job offers in my field because my parents begged me to stay and help the family. They told me my brother, Jason, fake name, wasn't really cut out for business and that I was the one they could rely on. I was flattered, but also burdened. Still, I said yes. I poured everything into making the company modern, competitive, and profitable. And for a while, it worked. I introduced systems that saved money, expanded our client base, and basically dragged the business into the 21st century. We were finally in the black after years of struggle. I thought my parents saw me as a partner. Then the betrayal came. One morning, my parents called me into their office. I thought it was going to be about our new contracts or maybe even them officially giving me a stake in the company. Instead, they told me they had to let me go. Their reasoning? They couldn't afford my salary anymore. Mind you, my salary was barely livable, less than what I would have made at any entry-level corporate job. But here's the kicker. They kept my brother Jason. Jason, who showed up late 3 days a week, who botched invoices, who spent more time scrolling on his phone than actually working. Jason, who openly admitted he only worked there because he didn't want a real job. When I asked why, my mom said, "Jason needs stability more than you do. You're resourceful, you'll land on your feet." My dad added, "Family comes first, but sometimes we have to make tough choices." That was the moment I realized I wasn't family in the way I thought. I was an employee, disposable, replaceable, not even as valuable as my incompetent brother. I walked out that day with a box of my things and a pit in my stomach. I didn't yell, I didn't beg. I just left. But as the door closed behind me, I swore to myself I wouldn't forget it. And I didn't. What they didn't know was that my departure was the start of something they could never have imagined. And years later, I'd be the one holding their fate in my hands. Walking out of that office, I felt like someone had ripped the floor out from under me. I had given them my 20s, my energy, my loyalty. And in the end, I wasn't worth more than a line on their expense sheet. For the first time in years, I had no job, no plan, no income, and no real sense of who I was outside of the kid who ran the business. The first few months were brutal. I sent out resume after resume, but it turns out when your entire work history is tied to family business, recruiters don't exactly take you seriously. One interviewer even smirked and said, "So you just worked for mom and dad? That doesn't count as real experience." That one stung more than I'd like to admit. Meanwhile, Jason was posting Instagram stories of him grinding at the office, by which I mean sipping iced coffee in the break room while other people actually worked. My parents liked and shared those posts, calling him their rock. I had to unfollow them just to stay sane. But I refused to spiral. If my parents thought I'd land on my feet, fine. I'd prove them right, just not in the way they imagined. I signed up for night courses to sharpen my skills. Accounting, project management, business analytics. I started freelancing, first small gigs, then bigger contracts. Word spread fast that I wasn't just the kid from my parents' shop. I had ideas, I had discipline, and unlike Jason, I actually cared about results. Within a couple years, I landed at a mid-sized firm in the same industry as my parents' company. It wasn't glamorous at first, but I had a manager who saw my potential and gave me real responsibility. And I ran with it. Every late night, every spreadsheet, every client call. I treated it like a stepping stone. And then came the opportunity that changed everything. Our CEO pulled me into his office one afternoon. He told me he'd been impressed with my performance and vision. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "We're looking to expand into your parents' region. We want someone who knows the terrain. Would you be interested in leading the project?" I remember just sitting there, stunned. The irony was unreal. My parents had tossed me aside like dead weight, and now I was being asked to spearhead a team that would directly compete with them. I didn't answer right away. I told my CEO I needed a day to think. But in reality, I already knew. I went home that night, stared at the ceiling, and thought about every sacrifice, every insult, every time I'd been dismissed or told I wasn't the priority. I thought about Jason coasting while I bled for that company. And I thought about how it felt to walk out with that box in my arms. By the time the sun came up, my decision was clear. I was done being their disposable kid. If fate handed me the chance to build something bigger, stronger, and directly across from them, I wasn't going to say no. So I said yes. And that was the beginning of a new chapter. One that would eventually put me face to face with the very people who fired me, only this time the power dynamic would be reversed. Taking that project was like stepping into a parallel universe. Suddenly, I wasn't the kid sweeping floors or taking orders from parents who never really saw me. I was the one making decisions, leading a team, and carving out something of my own. For the first time, I felt free. The company I joined wasn't a mom-and-pop shop like my parents. It was streamlined, professional, forward-thinking. They actually listened to ideas, valued innovation, and gave me resources to make things happen. When I suggested adopting new tech platforms, they didn't brush me off like my dad used to with a grumble of, "We've been fine doing it this way for 30 years. No. They handed me a budget and said, "Show us what you can do." And I delivered. Within a year, my team had expanded operations into 3 counties, including the one where my parents' business was barely hanging on. We offered faster service, better pricing models, and, most importantly, consistency. Clients who had once relied on my parents' company started calling us instead. I didn't go after them personally, but word spreads in this industry. Meanwhile, I heard through the grapevine that my parents were struggling. They had never adapted to online systems or modern supply chain methods. Jason, unsurprisingly, wasn't helping. He was technically managing, but all that meant was sending employees to do his work while he bragged about being an executive. Customers complained about late shipments, botched orders, and rude interactions. Still, I wasn't gloating, at least not yet. I was too focused on building. The harder I worked, the more recognition I got. My CEO eventually promoted me to regional director, a position that gave me oversight of multiple branches. Suddenly, I wasn't just competing with my parents' shop. I was overseeing a network that dwarfed theirs. But success came with an unexpected twist: visibility. One afternoon, I walked into a client meeting and locked eyes with someone I hadn't seen in years, an old supplier who used to work exclusively with my parents. He looked shocked. "You're running this now?" he asked. When I nodded, he just laughed. "Your folks must be kicking themselves." That comment stuck with me. Were they? Or were they still clinging to the belief that Jason would somehow pull through for them? I didn't have to wonder for long. Not 2 weeks later, I got a phone call. My mom's voice came through the line, shaky but familiar. "We heard your company opened a new branch nearby. Maybe we should talk?" Talk. After years of silence. After firing me like I was expendable. Now they wanted to talk. I told her I was busy and hung up. But inside, a storm was brewing. Part of me felt satisfaction. Finally, they needed me. Another part of me felt a flicker of guilt, like I was betraying them by succeeding where they failed. Still, I knew this was only the beginning. Their company was starting to crumble, and sooner or later, they'd come knocking again. Only this time, I wouldn't be the desperate kid begging for approval. This time, I'd be the one holding the cards. The call from my mom had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. For years, I'd fantasized about this exact moment, about them realizing their mistake, about them finally acknowledging what I had brought to the table. But when it actually happened, it didn't feel satisfying. Felt strange. Like a chapter from a book I thought I'd already finished was being reopened without my permission. I ignored her for a while. I threw myself into work, building my division stronger, faster, better. But the calls kept coming. First Mom, then Dad, and finally even Jason, though his tone was more smug than desperate. "Bro, you gotta help us out. We're family." Hearing him of all people say that almost made me laugh. Eventually, I agreed to meet my parents. Out of curiosity more than anything. We sat down at a diner halfway between their office and mine. I expected them to look older, worn down. I wasn't prepared for how bad it really was. My dad's suit looked like it had seen better decades. My mom's eyes were ringed with exhaustion, and the confident posture they used to carry had been replaced by slumped shoulders. They tried to make small talk at first, but I wasn't having it. Finally, my dad sighed and laid it out. Their business was failing. Fast. Orders were drying up, suppliers were switching to competitors, including mine, and debts were piling high. He admitted, grudgingly, that keeping Jason while letting me go had been a mistake. He said they thought they were protecting him, but in doing so, they'd crippled themselves. For the first time in my life, I heard my dad say words I never thought he was capable of. "We need you." I sat there, coffee cup in hand, trying to process it. The teenage version of me, the one who had begged for recognition, wanted to jump at those words. But the adult version of me remembered the humiliation of being tossed aside, the years of struggle to rebuild, and the loyalty they had never shown me. So I asked them point blank, "Where was this energy when you fired me? When you told me Jason needed stability more than me?" Silence. My mom looked down at her hands. My dad just muttered, "We made a mistake." They wanted me to consult, to help them restructure, to maybe even invest in keeping the business afloat. But as they spoke, all I could think about was the irony. They had cut me off to save money, and now the only way to survive was to beg for my help. I told them I'd think about it, but deep down, I already knew my answer. My loyalty had shifted. I wasn't their safety net anymore. I had my own company to protect, my own employees depending on me. And truthfully, a part of me wanted to watch them face the consequences of their choices. As I left the diner, Jason jogged up to me in the parking lot. He smirked and said, "You'll fix this for us, right? You always do." And in that moment, something inside me hardened. No, not this time. After that diner meeting, I thought maybe my parents would try to fix things on their own. Maybe they'd finally hold Jason accountable, or at least attempt to modernize their operations. But no. Within weeks, I started hearing whispers from clients and suppliers. Late payments, botched shipments, entire orders disappearing into thin air. Their reputation, once solid in the community, was tanking. Jason, instead of stepping up, seemed to double down on his worst habits. I heard through a former coworker that he had been leasing luxury cars on the company's dime and bragging to employees about being the real heir to the throne. Meanwhile, loyal staff who had been with my parents for years were quitting left and right. One of them even applied to my company, and during the interview, she straight up told me, "I just can't watch the place burn anymore." And burn it did. The numbers told the story better than any rumor could. Within a year, their revenues had dropped by nearly half. By the second year, creditors were circling. They owed money to suppliers, banks, even employees. Word got around that payroll had been delayed more than once. Then came the kicker. My CEO called me into his office one morning with a folder in his hand. Inside were acquisition targets, struggling companies in our industry we could potentially buy out to expand our market share. And there, on page 3, was my parents' business. I froze. Seeing the name of the company I'd practically grown up in listed alongside words like distressed asset and potential acquisition felt surreal. It was like looking at a ghost from my past, stripped of all the pride and nostalgia, reduced to cold financials and red ink. My CEO smirked. "You know these guys, don't you?" he asked. I nodded slowly. He didn't push, but he did say something that stuck with me. "This could be a smart play. They've got a decent client list buried under all that dysfunction. With the right leadership, we could turn it around." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that box I carried out of their office years ago, the humiliation of being replaced by Jason, the years of struggle that followed. And now, here I was in a position not just to compete with them, but to own them. But the decision wasn't as simple as it sounded. Buying them out would mean saving the family name, but it would also mean inheriting their debt, their mess, and most likely Jason himself, who I knew wouldn't go quietly. On the other hand, letting the acquisition move forward without me meant they'd probably lose everything to some faceless corporation. It was poetic justice either way. But I knew one thing for certain. The power had shifted. For the first time, they weren't the ones holding my future in their hands. I was holding theirs, and I wasn't sure yet whether I wanted to crush them or take over. Not long after that acquisition folder landed on my desk, the inevitable happened. My parents showed up at my office. No phone call, no appointment, they just walked in, past the receptionist, like they still had some unspoken authority over me. I hadn't seen them in months, and the difference was shocking. My dad, who once strutted with a kind of old-school pride, now looked like a man carrying the weight of failure on his back. My mom had that anxious smile plastered on her face, the one she always used when she was trying to smooth over Jason's screw-ups. And Jason, he strolled in behind them, dressed in a designer jacket I knew damn well the company couldn't afford, chewing gum like he owned the place. "Son," my dad started, his voice heavy, "we need your help." Those words hung in the air. I could feel my employees in the outer office pretending not to eavesdrop. My parents hadn't come to see me in years unless they needed something. And now, with their business circling the drain, suddenly I was son again. They explained everything I already knew. The debts, the fleeing clients, the suppliers cutting ties. Jason sat there smirking like he was untouchable, occasionally chiming in with gems like, "The market's just been unfair," or, "We'd be fine if people weren't stabbing us in the back." Finally, my mom reached across the desk and grabbed my hand. "We were wrong to let you go. You were the one who kept everything together. Jason isn't, well, he isn't built for this." Jason snapped his head toward her. "What the hell, Mom?" he barked. But she didn't let go of my hand. Her eyes were wet. "Please, save the family business. For all of us." I pulled my hand back. My heart was pounding, but not with sympathy. With anger. Years of it. I remembered her exact words when they fired me. "Jason needs stability more than you do." And now I was supposed to swoop in and fix everything after they threw me away like trash? I leaned back in my chair and asked, "Why should I? Give me one good reason why I should put my company, my career, and my people on the line to save you." My dad went silent. My mom stammered about family and blood. Jason rolled his eyes and muttered, "Because it's your duty." That was it. That single sentence snapped something in me. My duty? My duty had been to them when I was a kid, stocking shelves and balancing books. My duty had been staying after college when I could have had a real career. My duty had been giving them my best years while Jason coasted. And what was their duty to me? Firing me, replacing me, abandoning me. I told them I'd think about it, but the truth was already written on my face. I wasn't going to save them. Not like this. As they left, Jason sneered and said, "Don't get cocky, bro. You wouldn't even have a career if it wasn't for us." I didn't reply, but in my head I thought, "No, Jason, you wouldn't even have a career if it wasn't for me. And soon you won't have one at all." Because the buyout talks were heating up. And the choice wasn't between saving their business or letting it die. The choice was whether I'd be the one to bury it or to own it outright. The weeks after my parents' visit were strangely quiet. Too quiet. I figured they were scrambling behind the scenes, trying to patch holes in a ship that was already sinking. Meanwhile, the acquisition talks inside my own company were ramping up. My CEO wanted a list of final recommendations, which businesses were worth absorbing and which were too far gone. Naturally, my parents' company was near the top of that list. It felt surreal going through their financials. Numbers I used to pore over late at night as their unpaid bookkeeper were now spreadsheets full of red ink. Debt stacked on debt, loans in default, supplier contracts hanging by a thread. And yet, buried beneath the wreckage was potential. A recognizable name, a small but loyal customer base, decent real estate holdings. To my CEO, it wasn't personal, it was math. To me, it was personal in every possible way. Then came Jason. He showed up at my apartment one night, unannounced. I opened the door to find him leaning against the frame, reeking of cologne and entitlement. "Look," he said, brushing past me like he owned the place. "I know Mom and Dad are groveling, but we both know how this ends. You're gonna swoop in, bail us out, and I'll still be running things. That's how it's always been." I couldn't help but laugh. Not because it was funny, but because he truly believed it. Jason had lived his whole life cushioned by my parents' blind favoritism. In his mind, no matter how badly he screwed up, someone, usually me, would clean up the mess. But this time, I didn't play along. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "What makes you think you'll be running anything when this is over?" For a moment, the smugness cracked. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare," he said, voice low. "This is our family's business, not yours." I stepped closer. "Funny. You only called it ours when it suits you. When I was carrying the weight, it was just mine. When I was fired, it was just yours. Now that it's crumbling, suddenly it's ours again." Jason shoved past me, muttering curses, but not before spitting out one final line. "If you go through with this, you'll regret it." I didn't sleep that night. His words echoed in my head, not as a threat, but as confirmation. He knew I had the power now. For the first time, he was afraid. The following week, my CEO asked for my recommendation. Should we pursue the buyout or let the company collapse on its own? I stared at the report in front of me, filled with numbers, projections, risks. But what I really saw was my mom's pleading eyes, my dad's defeated sighs, and Jason's smug grin. The same grin that haunted me since the day they fired me. This wasn't just business anymore. This was the moment where I decided what kind of man I was going to be. Do I show mercy, or do I finish what they started the day they tossed me aside? When my CEO pressed me for a final recommendation, I realized I'd been dancing around the decision for weeks. I wanted to believe I was weighing the financial risks, the integration costs, the potential client retention. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. This wasn't just about profit. This was about me standing at a crossroads between the past and the future. I thought about every night I stayed late at the family business, trying to salvage outdated systems while Jason played games on his phone. I thought about that humiliating meeting where my parents told me I was expendable, that Jason needed stability more. I thought about walking out with that cardboard box, wondering if I had just wasted the most important years of my life. And then I thought about where I was now. Respected, successful, holding the fate of their company in my hands. So I gave my CEO my answer. We buy them out. Once the decision was made, the machine kicked into gear. Lawyers drafted agreements, accountants picked through every corner of the company's finances, and our acquisitions team began preparing transition plans. It was business as usual for everyone else, but for me it was personal warfare dressed up in spreadsheets and contracts. The news traveled fast. Within days, I got another call from my mom. Her voice cracked as she asked, "Is it true? Are you really the one behind the buyout offer?" I didn't deny it. She went quiet for a long time before whispering, "We just wanted to protect Jason." That line hit me harder than I expected. After everything, after the collapse, after all the evidence staring them in the face, they were still clinging to him. Still justifying the decision that had shattered everything. When word reached Jason, his reaction was the opposite of quiet. He stormed into my office 2 days later, red-faced and shaking with fury. "You think you can just take what's mine?" he shouted, slamming his fist on my desk. "This company is in my blood. I'll burn it down before I let you have it." I stayed calm, even as my team tensed outside the glass walls. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Jason, you already burned it down. I'm just buying the ashes." That line broke him. He cursed, he threatened, he even tried to bluff about having investors lined up. But I knew the truth. No one was coming to save him. Not this time. As security escorted him out, I sat back in my chair and realized something. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was closure. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing their approval or fighting for scraps of recognition. I was taking control of my own story. The contracts weren't signed yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. Soon, the business that had defined my childhood and nearly destroyed me would officially be mine. And the question wasn't whether I'd win. It was what I'd do with that victory once it was in my hands. The day the contracts were signed, I felt a strange mix of triumph and grief. On paper, it was just another acquisition for my company. But for me, it was the culmination of years of resentment, betrayal, and hard work. The family business, the place I'd given my blood, sweat, and youth to, was now mine. Not by inheritance, not by loyalty, but by conquest. I toured the office the following week. Walking through those familiar halls was like stepping into a time machine. The same squeaky floorboard by the break room. The same faded motivational posters my mom had taped up decades ago. But the energy was different now. Employees looked exhausted. Morale was in the gutter, and the once bustling workspace felt hollow. When I introduced myself as the new owner, some employees broke down crying with relief. One woman who'd been there since I was a teenager hugged me and whispered, "Thank God, we thought it was over." But not everyone was relieved. My parents insisted on meeting with me privately. We sat in the same office where they'd fired me all those years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. My dad sat stiffly, like a man trying to hold on to dignity he no longer had. My mom kept fidgeting with her wedding ring. Jason, predictably, slouched in the corner, arms crossed, radiating hostility. My dad cleared his throat. "So, you've made your point. You've proven yourself. Congratulations." His voice dripped with bitterness. "Now hand it back." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "The company," he snapped. "You've humiliated us enough. If you care about this family at all, you'll return it." Jason chimed in, sneering. "Yeah, you had your little revenge fantasy. Now give it back to the people who built it." I laughed. Couldn't help it. The sheer audacity was unbelievable. Built it? I was the one who built it. I kept it alive while you two ignored the future and Jason played CEO on Instagram. My mom's eyes filled with tears. "We made mistakes, but family businesses are meant to stay in the family." I leaned forward, voice steady but cold. "It is staying in the family, just not in your hands anymore." Jason exploded. He jumped to his feet, shouting that I was a traitor, that I was destroying everything. He even tried to lunge at me before security stepped in. My dad sat there, silent, his face a mask of rage and regret. My mom whispered one final plea. "Please, don't shut us out completely." But the truth was I already had. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about survival, progress, and finally claiming the recognition I'd been denied my whole life. The business was mine now, and I had no intention of giving it back. As I walked out of that office, my office now, I realized the kid who once begged for approval had finally died. In his place stood someone my parents could never control again. And the only thing left was deciding what role, if any, my family would have in the empire I was about to build. Owning the company didn't feel like victory at first. It felt like standing in the ruins of a house I once called home. The bones were there, but everything inside was broken, the finances, the trust, the people. Rebuilding it was going to take years. But I wasn't afraid of the work. Work was the one thing I'd never shied away from. The harder part was deciding what to do with my family. My CEO made it clear. If I wanted to keep them on in any capacity, it was my call. Technically, I could have given my parents ceremonial roles, or even found Jason some low-level position to keep the peace. But every time I pictured that, I saw the box in my hands the day they fired me. I heard my mom's voice telling me Jason needed stability more than I did. I saw the smug grin on Jason's face when he told me it was my duty to save them. And I realized, if I gave them a lifeline now, nothing would change. Jason would keep bleeding resources, my parents would keep enabling him, and the business I had just saved would be poisoned from the inside out. So I made the hardest choice of my life. I called my parents into what used to be their boardroom and told them plainly, "Your chapter here is over. You're no longer part of this company. Neither is Jason." My mom cried. My dad raged. Jason laughed bitterly and said, "You think you're better than us now? You'll screw it up just like we did." But I didn't back down. I handed them separation agreements and told them security would escort them out once they signed. It was cold, it was brutal, and it was final. When the door shut behind them, I sat in silence for a long time. The revenge fantasy I'd carried for years didn't feel as sweet as I thought it would. Instead of triumph, I felt empty. Like I'd finally cut the cord tying me to people who never really saw me, and now I was free, but alone. Over the next months, I poured myself into the business. We rebranded, restructured, and rebuilt. Clients returned. Employees who had been hanging on by a thread started smiling again. Slowly, the company transformed from a crumbling relic into something fresh, something strong, something mine. And yet, every once in a while I still get calls. My mom leaves voicemails asking if we can meet for dinner. Jason sends drunken texts calling me a backstabber. My dad pretends he doesn't care, but I've heard from relatives that he tells anyone who will listen that I stole the company. Maybe I did. Or maybe I just claimed what should have been mine all along. So here I am, years later, asking the internet what my own family refuses to admit. AITA for refusing to save my parents' business on their terms, and instead letting it collapse so I could take it over myself?